In the glass and steel canyons of the corporate world, silence is a language of its own. It is rarely an admission of guilt or a sign of agreement. More often, it is the quiet gathering of a storm, the deep breath before the plunge. The silence of a person who has endured too much is not emptiness. It is a space where revenge begins to take shape. And for Liam Sterling, on that cold Tuesday afternoon, silence was all he had left. The stage was the main conference room at Innovate Dynamics, a glittering monument to New York ambition. The air, usually buzzing with hushed conversations and the clicking of keyboards, was thick with a tense, unnatural stillness. Every employee had been summoned. On the podium, bathed in the cold glow of a projector screen displaying the company logo, stood Marcus Thorne, the director of product development. He was a man who wore his charisma like a tailored suit, but today, his smile was gone, replaced by a mask of grave disappointment. His eyes scanned the crowd, finally landing on Liam, and the trap was sprung. "It is with a heavy heart," Marcus began, his voice echoing slightly, "that I must address a serious breach of trust." A murmur rippled through the room. Liam stood frozen, his own heart starting to pound a dull, heavy rhythm against his ribs. This had to be a mistake. Marcus continued, weaving a tale of deceit. He spoke of Project Chimera, the company's revolutionary AI platform, Liam's brainchild, his life's work. He spoke of a catastrophic data leak, of intellectual property sabotage, of a betrayal from within. And then, he pointed, not with his finger, but with his words, each one a polished stone aimed directly at Liam. Due to gross negligence and a deliberate violation of company protocol, which has jeopardized the very future of this company, we are terminating Liam Sterling's employment, effective immediately. The words hit him, not like a shout, but like the cold, silent press of a blade. The room spun. He could feel hundreds of pairs of eyes turning towards him, a suffocating weight of accusation and pity. His gaze darted desperately through the crowd, searching for one face, just one. Chloe, his best friend, his confidant, the one person who knew every line of code he had ever written for Chimera. He found her in the third row. But she didn't meet his eyes. She was staring intently at the floor, her hair falling like a curtain, hiding her face from him, from everyone. In that moment, the humiliation of being fired was eclipsed by the searing pain of betrayal. It was a wound far deeper than any career setback. He didn't fight, he didn't argue. What was the point? The verdict had already been decided. In a daze, he walked back to his desk, the silence of the open plan office parting for him like a morbid sea. He packed his life into a small, brown, cardboard box, a framed photo of his mother, a worn-out programming manual, a coffee mug Chloe had given him for his birthday. Each item felt like an artifact from a forgotten life. As he walked toward the exit, a ghost in his own story, the whispers began to rise behind him, filling the silence he left behind. The glass doors slid shut, and Liam Sterling stood alone on the pavement, the roar of the city, a deafening counterpoint to the utter silence in his soul. To understand the fall, you must first understand the heights from which Liam fell. You have to go back, before the silent walk of shame, before the packed-up box and the shattered trust, to a time when the office at Innovate Dynamics was not a courtroom, but a sanctuary. It was a place where Liam Sterling believed he was building the future, not just for the company, but for himself. Liam was not the kind of genius you see in movies. There was no wild hair, no frantic scribbling on glass walls. His brilliance was quiet, contained, almost monastic in its focus. He was an architect of digital worlds, a man who saw the stark, cold logic of code as a form of poetry. While others saw lines of text, Liam saw cathedrals of logic, elegant structures of cause and effect rising into the digital ether. He had grown up in a small apartment in Queens, the son of a librarian and a postal worker, and he carried their humility with him. For him, the immense salary and the prestige of a company like Innovate Dynamics were secondary. The true reward was the work itself, the act of creation, of solving a puzzle that no one else could, of building something beautiful and functional from nothing. His ambition was not for power, but for security, driven by a quiet, constant worry for his mother. Her illness was a slow, creeping shadow, a degenerative condition that required expensive care, and Liam's salary was the only thing holding that shadow at bay. Every late night at the office, every weekend sacrificed to a complex problem, was an unspoken promise to her that she would never have to worry. At the center of his world, both professionally and personally, were two people. The first was Marcus Thorne. To a young, unassuming talent like Liam, Marcus was everything a boss should be. He was charming, articulate, and had a way of making you feel like you were the most important person in the room. In their early one-on-one meetings, Marcus would lean forward, his eyes full of earnest conviction, and paint a glorious picture of Liam's future. "You're not just a developer, Liam," he'd say, his voice a low, confidential hum. "You're an artist. Project Chimera isn't just a product, it's your masterpiece. And when this thing launches, the world is going to know your name. I'll make sure of it." He promised Liam leadership, a directorship, a seat at the table where the real decisions were made. And Liam, who had never been celebrated for anything other than his quiet competence, believed him. He saw Marcus not as a manager, but as a mentor, a champion who saw the potential hidden beneath his reserved exterior. The second, and far more important person, was Chloe Vance. If Marcus was the sun in Liam's professional solar system, Chloe was the earth beneath his feet. She had started at the company 6 months after him, a sharp, witty marketing analyst who was assigned to do market research for his nascent project. They bonded almost instantly. She was the one who could pull him out of his shell, who could translate his technical jargon into human speech, and who seemed to genuinely understand his passion. Their friendship was built on 100 small rituals. Morning coffee runs where she would poke fun at his overly complex order, shared lunches at a tiny noodle shop where they'd map out user interfaces on paper napkins, late nights where she would keep him company, not offering technical solutions, but simply being there, a steady, supportive presence as he wrestled with a stubborn piece of code. Liam, who had always found social interaction more complex than quantum computing, opened up to her completely. He shared his fears about his mother's health, his dreams for the future, and most importantly, he shared Project Chimera. Project Chimera was Liam's soul rendered in code. It was a predictive AI engine so advanced it bordered on prescient. It could analyze market data and not just predict trends, but explain the human sentiment behind them. It was a machine that understood why people made the choices they made, a digital oracle for the modern age. It was impossibly complex, a delicate web of algorithms and neural networks that Liam had been building, in secret, in his own time, long before he even pitched it to Marcus. With Chloe, he let down his guard. He walked her through the core architecture, explained the philosophy behind his most secret algorithms, and gave her administrative access to the development servers so she could pull data for her marketing reports. In his mind, her belief in the project was as crucial as any line of code. He'd often find her in his office, looking over his shoulder, her expression a mix of awe and encouragement. "It's like watching a magician, Liam," she'd say, shaking her head with a smile. "I don't know how you do it." He never once thought to question her sincerity. Why would he? In the cutthroat world of corporate tech, he had found a true partner, a friend. He felt safe. There was one evening, about 8 months before his termination, that would later replay in his mind like a recurring nightmare. They had just achieved a major breakthrough. The Chimera prototype had successfully predicted a minor stock market fluctuation with 99% accuracy. It was a stunning proof of concept. The three of them, Liam, Chloe, and Marcus, stood in Liam's dimly lit office, staring at the glowing data on the screen. Marcus was ecstatic, clapping Liam hard on the back, his voice booming with talk of bonuses and press releases. "You did it, you absolute genius, you did it." Liam felt a rare surge of pride, a warmth spreading through his chest. He looked over at Chloe, expecting to share a triumphant smile. She was beaming, her eyes shining as she looked at the screen. But then, for just a fraction of a second, as her eyes met his, the smile faltered. A different look flickered across her face, a fleeting, unreadable expression that was gone as quickly as it came. It wasn't pride. It was something colder, sharper, something like envy or perhaps calculation. At the time, he dismissed it as a trick of the light, a flicker of the monitor. He was too caught up in the moment, in the warmth of Marcus's praise and the shared victory. He couldn't have known that he wasn't looking at his two biggest supporters. He was looking at his judge and his executioner. He was the architect of a brilliant future, but he was utterly blind to the demolition that was being planned right in front of his eyes. Success, in the corporate world, is a powerful magnet. It draws attention, praise, and resources. But it also draws darker things: jealousy, ambition, and the covetous eyes of those who would rather steal a throne than build one. In the months following Project Chimera's successful proof of concept, the atmosphere at Innovate Dynamics began to change. It was not a sudden shift, but a slow, almost imperceptible cooling of the air, a subtle change in the currents of office politics that Liam, in his focused bubble of creation, almost failed to notice. The change began with the doors. Specifically, the glass door to Marcus Thorne's office. For years, that door had been open to Liam. Now, it seemed to be perpetually closed, and more often than not, Chloe was on the other side of it. Liam would walk by and see them, heads bowed together in a conspiratorial intimacy, their voices too low to be heard. If they saw him approaching, the conversation would halt, and Chloe would look up, offering him a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. The first time it happened, he felt a brief, sharp sting of exclusion. He mentioned it to her later, casually, by the coffee machine. "You and Marcus seem to be spending a lot of time in secret meetings lately." Chloe just laughed, a light, airy sound that was meant to be reassuring. "Oh, that? It's just painfully boring budget forecasting and resource allocation. Trust me, Liam, I'm saving you from death by spreadsheet. You just focus on being the genius. Let me handle the boring corporate stuff." It sounded plausible. Liam hated spreadsheets. He wanted to believe her, and so he did. He went back to his work, telling himself he was lucky to have a friend shielding him from the drudgery of management. Then, the language began to shift. It started in the weekly progress reports that were circulated to the executive team. Liam would write a detailed, technical summary of his week's work, and Chloe, as was their new routine, would offer to punch it up to make it more digestible for the non-technical leadership. One Friday, he was accidentally included on the final email chain that went out to the CEO. He opened the attached report and felt a strange disconnect. The words were familiar, but the framing was all wrong. A paragraph describing a complex neural network he had spent 100 hours perfecting was now prefaced with, "Following the strategic framework established by Chloe, our team was able to achieve a significant breakthrough." A bug he had single-handedly found and fixed was described as, "A potential vulnerability was identified and resolved, thanks to our cross-functional collaborative process." The pronoun "I" had been systematically erased, replaced by an all-encompassing and increasingly ambiguous "we." When he questioned Chloe about it, she was a master of deflection, framing her theft as a favor to him. "Liam, you're too modest. This is how you play the game at this level," she explained, her tone that of a seasoned mentor. "It's not about who physically typed the code, it's about the team. It makes us all look good. It makes you look like a leader, not just a coder." He was a builder, not a politician. He didn't understand the subtle art of claiming territory with words. It felt wrong, but he accepted her explanation, telling himself that maybe this was how things worked in the executive world he was supposedly destined for. The most unnerving change, however, came from Marcus. The warm, encouraging mentor began to be replaced by a demanding, almost paranoid overseer. Marcus started summoning Liam for impromptu meetings, not to discuss vision or progress, but to grill him on security. "The board is getting jittery, Liam," Marcus would say, his fingers steepled, his expression grim. "A project this valuable, it's a target. I need you to walk me through the security protocols again. Who has root access? How are the data logs encrypted? Where are the physical servers located?" The questions were relentless and strangely specific. They were not the questions of a concerned director, they were the questions of someone searching for a weakness. But Liam, still operating under the illusion of trust, saw it as a test. He believed Marcus was vetting him for leadership, checking to see if he had the diligence required for a senior role. So, with painstaking detail, He explained everything. He drew diagrams of the firewall architecture. He detailed the multi-layered access permissions. He explained the very fail-safes and backdoors that, in the wrong hands, could be used to simulate a catastrophic breach. He was so focused on proving his competence that he never stopped to ask why Marcus, a man who famously couldn't operate the office television without help, was suddenly so interested in the granular details of cryptographic keys. He was unknowingly providing a complete user manual for his own destruction. A quiet unease began to settle in the back of Liam's mind, a low hum of dissonance he couldn't quite silence. It was the feeling you get when you walk into a room and sense that people were just talking about you. It was the way conversations would sometimes stop when he approached the marketing department's coffee nook. It was the fact that Chloe, who used to save him a seat at lunch every day, was now frequently too busy or had a last-minute meeting with Marcus. He was being subtly, methodically, and expertly isolated, but to acknowledge that reality would be to accept a truth too terrible to contemplate, that his mentor was a fraud and his best friend was a traitor. It was easier to believe he was just being paranoid, that the pressure of the project was getting to him. The final key was handed over on a Wednesday afternoon. Chloe came to his desk, her expression a perfect blend of stress and appeal. "Liam, I am so sorry to ask this," she said, "but the VP of Marketing wants a full data audit to prepare for the launch campaign, and my access level keeps timing out. It's a nightmare. Could you possibly give me your admin credentials for the root directory just for an hour? It would be a lifesaver." This was a significant request. The root directory was the heart of Chimera. It was a level of access Chloe had no business needing. A small, silent alarm bell went off in Liam's head. He hesitated, his fingers hovering over the keyboard. For a fleeting moment, he saw that same flicker in her eyes he'd seen months ago, the cold, calculating gleam. But then she placed a hand on his arm, her expression softening into the familiar, friendly smile he trusted. "I'll buy you noodles to say thank you," she said. And just like that, the alarm was silenced. The doubt was pushed back down into the darkness. He trusted her. He typed in the password he had never shared with anyone, and turned his monitor towards her. He had just given the serpent the key to the garden. He was still trying to be a good friend, oblivious to the fact that he was no longer a friend to them at all. He was just a problem that was about to be solved. In the intricate dance of corporate predation, the final move before the strike is often one of profound reassurance. The predator must calm its prey, lull it into a state of placid security, making the eventual attack all the more devastating for its surprise. For Liam, that moment of reassurance was delivered by Marcus Thorne, and it was a masterpiece of corporate theater. Marcus summoned him to his corner office, the one with the floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over the sprawling geometry of Manhattan. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the expensive mahogany desk. On it, 2 heavy crystal glasses and a bottle of single malt scotch that cost more than Liam's monthly rent. Marcus was beaming, his face a mask of paternal pride. "Liam," he began, his voice smooth and warm as the whiskey he was pouring. "I just got out of a meeting with the board. The final presentation for the Chimera launch is set for next month. They're not just impressed, they're ecstatic. And they are fully on board with my recommendation." He slid a thick, cream-colored envelope across the polished surface of the desk. Liam's name and a new title were printed on it in elegant, embossed letters. Liam Sterling, Head of Technology and Innovation. Liam picked it up, his fingers trembling slightly. It felt impossibly heavy. Inside was a formal offer letter detailing a salary that made his head swim, stock options that could secure his future for decades, and a description of his new role. He would be the master of his own division, the guiding force behind all of Innovate Dynamics' future projects. He would no longer be just the builder, he would be the architect of the company's entire technological destiny. A wave of profound, bone-deep relief washed over him, so powerful it almost brought him to his knees. Every sleepless night, every sacrificed weekend, every ounce of intellectual and emotional energy he had poured into his work, it had all been worth it. He thought of his mother, of the mountain of medical bills, of the constant, gnawing anxiety about her care. This letter was not just a promotion. It was a promise of peace. It was safety. I don't know what to say, Marcus," he stammered, his voice thick with emotion. "Thank you." Marcus clapped him on the shoulder, a gesture that felt like a benediction. "Don't thank me, Liam. You earned this. This is your moment. Go home, celebrate. The future is finally here." And Liam did. He walked out of that office feeling like he could fly, clutching the letter like a holy relic. He was completely, blissfully, and dangerously unaware that the promise was the bait, and the poison was already being prepared. Later that night, long after the city lights had transformed the office windows into a million glittering stars, another figure sat at Liam's workstation. The only light came from the cold, blue glow of his triple monitor setup. It was Chloe. Her movements were quiet, precise, and utterly devoid of emotion. She was not the warm, witty friend from the noodle shop. She was a different person entirely, a cold operative executing a mission. With the admin credentials Liam had so trustingly given her, she moved through the company's servers with the silent grace of a ghost. Her first task was to create a digital crime scene. In a deeply buried, obscure partition of the server, she created a new directory, naming it something deliberately bland: sys, log, archive, Q3. Inside it, she created a perfect, bit-for-bit duplicate of Project Chimera's core source code. Then, with the surgical precision of a saboteur, she went into the duplicate's code and began to corrupt it. She removed a critical block of code from the security protocol, a section that managed data encryption during transfers. It was a subtle, insidious change, one that would make the duplicate version vulnerable to a data leak, a flaw that, to a trained eye, would look like a lazy, reckless shortcut taken by a developer under pressure. Her next task was to create the trail of breadcrumbs that would lead directly to Liam. She opened the server's access logs, a vast, scrolling ledger of every digital action within the company. With a script she had written herself, she began injecting new entries, fabricating a history of illicit activity. Tuesday, 2:17 a.m. Login successful from IP address 72.2.29.28.185. User, L. Sterling. The IP address was an anonymous proxy server based in Eastern Europe. Tuesday, 2:19 a.m. Access granted. Root directory, project, Chimera divided by core, architecture. Tuesday, 2:25 a.m. Data packet transfer, 4.2 gigabytes, initiated to secure drop server. She repeated the process, creating a pattern of late-night incursions over several weeks, each one a digital footprint from a ghost. The final touch, her masterpiece of treachery, was the email. She accessed Liam's corporate email account. She didn't need to hack it. His password was saved in his browser. She composed a new message, addressing it to a fictional contact at a real competitor, Synergen Solutions. She kept the message brief, its vagueness a canvas onto which any investigator would paint a picture of guilt. Subject, acquisition. Body, as we discussed. The full architecture is packaged and ready for transfer, awaiting confirmation of the wire transfer to the account we set up. As a diversion, I will trigger a minor data leak on my end next week to cover our tracks. They won't know what hit them. She didn't send it. Sending it would be too risky. Instead, she saved it to his drafts folder. It was a ticking time bomb placed directly in the heart of his digital life, a confession he had never written. The following morning, she requested an urgent, confidential meeting with Marcus. In his office, the same office where Liam had been anointed just hours before, she laid out her discoveries. Her performance was flawless. Her voice was laced with a believable tremor of shock and distress. "Marcus, I was doing that marketing audit Liam gave me access for," she began, her eyes wide with feigned horror. "I stumbled onto a hidden directory, and then I found this." She handed him a tablet, displaying the falsified logs, the vulnerable duplicate code, and finally, the draft email. Marcus read it, his face slowly transforming from confusion to a theatrical display of rage and betrayal. "No," he whispered, shaking his head. "Not Liam. I treated him like a son." He paced the room for a moment, the picture of a heartbroken mentor. Then, he stopped, his expression hardening into one of cold, corporate resolve. He could bring this entire company down. We have to move, and we have to move now. We have to protect Innovate Dynamics. You did the right thing bringing this to me, Chloe. Their eyes met across the desk. The performance was over. They were no longer mentor and protege. They were co-conspirators, their pact sealed by a shared lie. At that exact moment, miles away in Queens, Liam was sitting at his mother's bedside, holding her hand. He was telling her the good news, showing her the offer letter. He spoke of a future free from financial worry, of better doctors, of a small house with a garden. And as his mother smiled, her eyes filled with tears of pride, the most venomous poison was already seeping into the foundations of the life he was so hopefully planning to build. A trap is only as effective as its timing. A snare pulled too early or too late is useless. The trap for Liam Sterling was designed by masters of this art, and it was set to spring at the moment of maximum impact, 1 week before the most important presentation in the history of Innovate Dynamics. This was Investor Week, when the company would unveil Project Chimera to a room full of venture capitalists and market analysts, the very people who held the company's future stock price in their hands. The office hummed with a frantic, high-stakes energy. For Liam, it was the final, exhilarating sprint of a marathon. He lived on coffee and adrenaline, spending 18-hour days putting the final, gleaming polish on his creation. He was happy. The pressure was immense, but it was the validating pressure of a man on the verge of his greatest triumph. He felt a deep sense of ownership and pride, fueled by the promise of his new role. He was the king of his own small kingdom, oblivious to the coup d'etat that was already in motion. The stage was set on a Tuesday afternoon. The first move was Chloe's, a masterpiece of corporate camouflage. At 3:15 p.m., she sent a carefully worded email to her department, with Marcus and the head of IT copied. Subject: Pre-launch server stress test. The email read, "Team, as part of our final preparations for next week's demo, I will be running a series of high-load diagnostics on the Chimera servers this afternoon to ensure stability. You may see some automated system alerts or temporary performance lags. Please disregard these unless they persist for more than an hour. This is routine procedure." It was the perfect alibi. It announced her presence in the system, framing her actions as diligent, responsible work. It also preemptively neutralized any initial alarm from the IT department, telling them, in essence, to ignore the smoke because it was part of a planned fire drill. With her digital alibi established, she began. From her terminal, she navigated not to the real Project Chimera, but to the hidden, corrupted duplicate she had created. Sys log archive Q3. It was the digital equivalent of a Hollywood movie, set a perfect replica that was designed to be destroyed. She took a deep breath and executed a single command. It was a custom script she had written, a piece of code designed to do one thing: attack the very vulnerability she had planted. The script initiated a massive, nonsensical data transfer, trying to push terabytes of junk data out of the server through the deliberately weakened encryption port. The effect was instantaneous and dramatic. In the company's IT nerve center, a server rack dedicated to Chimera monitoring suddenly flashed red. On the chief system administrator's monitor, a dozen high-priority security alerts began to cascade down the screen, each one screaming in digital panic. Unauthorized data, transfer in progress, critical encryption failure, potential exfiltration from secure partition. The system was doing exactly what it was designed to do: detect an attack. The fire drill had become a 5-alarm fire. A few minutes later, Marcus played his part. He burst out of his office, his phone clutched to his ear, his face a mask of controlled panic. "What is going on with the servers?" he boomed, his voice slicing through the office hum. "I'm getting code red alerts from IT. Is it Chimera?" He strode purposefully towards the IT department, his performance drawing the eyes of dozens of employees. He had created a public crisis. Chloe, on cue, rushed from her desk to his side, looking appropriately frazzled and confused. "I don't know, Marcus," she said, her voice trembling just enough. "My stress test must have hit something. Something is very, very wrong." Marcus immediately declared a full lockdown. "Kill all external access to the Chimera project." "Now," he commanded the head of IT. Then he turned, his eyes scanning the floor. "Where's Sterling?" Someone pointed to Liam's office, where he was on a conference call, headphones on, oblivious. "Keep him out of this," Marcus said in a low, urgent tone to the CTO, who had just arrived on the scene. "The system is under attack. The last thing we need is the lead architect in the system, potentially making things worse. We need to isolate the problem first." With that single command, he had successfully cut Liam off from his own creation, preventing him from discovering the truth, that the real Project Chimera was perfectly fine, and the attack was happening on a ghost server he didn't even know existed. The next move was to the boardroom. It was an emergency meeting of the highest level. The CEO, the CTO, the head of corporate security, Marcus, and Chloe. The air in the room was thick with dread. Liam was not invited. He was now the subject of the investigation, not a part of it. Marcus and Chloe laid out their perfectly constructed narrative, presenting their fabricated evidence with the grim solemnity of doctors delivering a fatal diagnosis. "It began during Chloe's routine diagnostic," Marcus explained, his voice heavy with gravitas. "It appears the test triggered a dormant vulnerability in the code, initiating a massive data breach." He let that sink in. Then, Chloe, playing the part of the horrified whistleblower, took over. She projected the logs from the ghost server onto the main screen. "The breach seems to have originated from this hidden partition," she said, pointing to the name of the directory she herself had created. "The code in this partition is compromised. The encryption protocols have been stripped. It's reckless. It's borderline sabotage." The CTO leaned forward, his face grim. "Who wrote that code? And who has access to that partition?" Marcus looked at Chloe, then back at the board, his expression one of profound reluctance and pain. "That's the most difficult part," he said quietly. He brought up the falsified server logs Chloe had created. The board members stared in silence at the screen, at the damning, undeniable digital footprints. Weeks of late-night logins from an anonymous IP address, all under one name, L. Sterling. And then, the final, brutal nail in the coffin. Marcus displayed the email from Liam's draft folder, the one that spoke of a wire transfer, of selling the company's secrets. He didn't have to say another word. The story was complete, airtight, and devastating. In the minds of everyone in that room, Liam Sterling was no longer the brilliant architect of their future. He was a traitor who had almost ruined them all, caught in the act only by the heroic diligence of Marcus Thorne and Chloe Vance. His fate was sealed. The stage for his public execution had been meticulously set, and the actors were all in place. All that was left was for the curtain to rise. The summons arrived not with a bang, but with a sterile, impersonal calendar notification. Mandatory all-hands meeting. Main conference room. 4 p.m. Liam accepted it without a second thought. He assumed it was a final pep talk before Investor Week, a moment for Marcus to rally the troops. As he walked towards the conference room, he felt a current of pride. He was the man of the hour, the architect of the project that had everyone buzzing. He expected to be recognized, perhaps even celebrated. The moment he stepped inside, however, that feeling evaporated. The room was unnervingly silent. The usual pre-meeting chatter was absent, replaced by a tense, heavy stillness. People were gathered in small, anxious clusters, whispering, their eyes darting around the room. When they saw him, the whispering would stop, and they would look away. A cold knot of confusion began to form in his stomach. He found a spot near the back, feeling strangely isolated, like a guest who had arrived at the wrong party. The lights dimmed. Marcus Thorne strode to the podium, his face etched with a somber gravity that commanded the room's absolute attention. He gripped the sides of the lectern, looking out over the sea of faces, his gaze lingering for a moment on Liam. "We call ourselves a family here at Innovate Dynamics," Marcus began, his voice a low, resonant baritone. "We celebrate together, we build together, and we trust each other. But the most painful wounds a family can suffer are the ones that are self-inflicted, the wounds that come from a betrayal of that trust." He paused, letting the ominous words hang in the air. Liam shifted uncomfortably. He thought of the project, of some catastrophic, last-minute bug he might have missed. A professional's fear, not a criminal's, began to creep in. Marcus continued, his voice rising with theatrical sorrow. He spoke of a shadow that had fallen over their greatest achievement, Project Chimera. He spoke of an attack, not from a rival company, but from within their own walls. He used words like sabotage, espionage, and a knife in the back of every single person in this room. And then, the screen behind him flickered to life. Liam's blood turned to ice. It was a screenshot of the server access logs, rows and rows of text, and next to each one, a highlighted column that repeated the same name over and over. L. Sterling. L. Sterling. L. Sterling. The timestamps were all in the dead of night. His heart hammered against his ribs. That's not possible, he thought, his mind scrambling for a logical explanation. A system glitch? A hack? Before he could process the impossible, the image on the screen changed. It was the email, the one from his drafts folder. The words were stark and damning against the white background, each one a death sentence to his career. As we discussed, awaiting confirmation of the wire transfer. I will trigger a minor data leak on my end. A collective, horrified gasp swept through the room. It was an ocean of sound that seemed to suck all the air from his lungs. The world began to feel distant, unreal, as if he were watching a movie about someone else. Then Marcus's voice cut through the haze, sharp and final as the fall of a guillotine. We have discovered, to our profound and utter shock, that the source of this betrayal was the project's own lead architect. It was Liam Sterling. Every head in the room turned towards him. It was a physical force, a tidal wave of accusation that pinned him to the spot. He felt his face flush with a burning heat. He opened his mouth to shout, to scream that it was all a lie, that he had never seen that email in his life, but his throat was constricted, his voice trapped behind a wall of pure shock. His mind was a maelstrom of denial and confusion. It made no sense. It was a nightmare. Then Marcus delivered the next, calculated blow. He softened his voice, turning towards the front row where Chloe was sitting. Chloe, he said, his tone dripping with false compassion, you worked most closely with him. You were the one who bravely brought this to our attention. I know this is incredibly difficult, but please, tell us what you found. Chloe stood up, her entire body trembling in a flawless performance of distress. She hugged her arms to her chest, looking not at Liam, but at the sympathetic faces of her colleagues. I still can't believe it, she said, her voice cracking perfectly. Liam was my best friend. I trusted him. But when I was running diagnostics, I saw anomalies. Things that didn't make sense. I didn't want to believe it, but the trail it kept leading back to him. She finally, briefly, flickered her gaze towards him. There was no pain in her eyes, no conflict, just a cold, terrifying emptiness. It was the look of a stranger. In that single, fleeting glance, the last vestige of Liam's denial crumbled into dust. This was not a mistake. It was an assassination. And the person holding the weapon was the one person he thought would have died to protect him. He was no longer a colleague. He was a spectacle, a pariah. The whispers turned from confused to damning. He could hear snippets. I always knew there was something off about him. So quiet, it's always the quiet ones. He could have ruined us all. He was being tried, judged, and convicted by a jury of his peers, based on evidence he had never seen and crimes he had never committed. Marcus let the condemnation wash over the room for a long moment before raising his hand for silence. He looked directly at Liam, his face a mask of righteous fury. Innovate Dynamics was built on integrity. It is the foundation of everything we do. We will not tolerate traitors in our house. His voice boomed through the speakers. Effective immediately, Liam Sterling's employment is terminated. Security will escort you to your desk to gather your personal belongings, and then you will be escorted from the premises. You are not to speak to anyone. It was over. The trap had closed. The public execution was complete. Liam stood there, numb, deaf to the continuing sounds of Marcus's speech. He was a ghost, already haunting the ruins of a life that had been stolen from him in the space of 10 minutes. An execution, no matter how public, is followed by a profound and terrible silence. After Liam was cast out of the glass tower of Innovate Dynamics, the roaring chaos of his public shaming collapsed into a vacuum. The city of New York, with its screaming sirens and ceaseless motion, became a silent film. He rode the subway home in a state of clinical shock, the cardboard box of his former life sitting on his lap like a coffin. The other passengers, with their tired, ordinary faces, seemed to belong to another species, another reality. They were worried about dinner, about rent, about the weekend. He was worried about how to tell his mother that the sun had just been extinguished from their sky. He couldn't. When he walked into their small, quiet apartment, she was in her favorite armchair, a blanket over her lap. She looked up and smiled, her face lighting up with a mother's pride. "How was the big meeting, honey? Are we celebrating tonight?" Liam felt a crack run through his soul. He forced a smile that felt like broken glass. "It was great, Mom. Really great," he lied, his voice thin and hollow. "So great, in fact, that Marcus gave me the whole week off before the final launch. To rest up." The lie was a poison he swallowed willingly, a temporary shield to protect her from a truth he knew she couldn't bear. The first few days were a blur of denial. He would wake up at 6 a.m., his body still programmed to the rhythm of his old life, and for a blissful, disoriented moment, he would forget. Then the memory would slam into him, a physical blow that left him breathless. The box of his belongings sat in the corner of his room, an unwelcome monument to his failure. He spent hours pacing his small apartment, replaying the meeting in his head, his mind a frantic mess of what-ifs and how-could-theys. He drafted 100 emails to the CEO, to HR, to anyone who would listen, each one a desperate, rambling attempt to explain the impossible. He typed until his fingers ached, trying to prove his innocence with logic and reason, but he never sent them. He knew with a dreadful certainty that the story was already written. He was the villain. Case closed. He tried calling Chloe. Her number went straight to voicemail. He sent a text. "Chloe, please, just tell me why." The message remained there, a single blue bubble of hope, until the next day, when it turned a stark, unforgiving green. He had been blocked. The digital walls had been erected. He was, for all intents and purposes, a ghost. Then came the professional winter. In the first week, armed with a naive belief that his talent would speak for itself, he updated his resume and began applying for jobs. The initial responses were enthusiastic. Recruiters saw the name Innovate Dynamics and Project Chimera, and their emails were full of exclamation points and eager requests for a call. The calls would start well. A friendly recruiter would praise his experience, his vision, his undeniable genius. "Your work on the Chimera architecture is legendary, Mr. Sterling," one said, her voice buzzing with excitement. "We'd love to bring you in." But then would come the inevitable pause. "I just need to run your name by the team and check a few references," they'd say. "I'll call you back this afternoon." The call never came. Emails went unanswered. He had become a phantom. After the fourth or fifth time this happened, he understood. Marcus and Chloe hadn't just fired him, they had salted the earth. They had made him radioactive. His reputation had been poisoned at the well, and the entire industry was now drinking from it. The lie they had told was so big, so audacious, that it had become the truth. As the weeks bled into months, the professional winter gave way to a deep, internal collapse. His identity had been so completely entwined with his work that, without it, he didn't know who he was. He was not Liam Sterling, the brilliant software architect. He was just Liam, an unemployed son, a liar, a failure. The passion he once had for coding, for creation, withered and died. His home computer, once a portal to infinite worlds of his own making, now sat on his desk like a tombstone, its monitors dark and accusing. Sleep offered no escape. He was tormented by nightmares where he would be writing code, only to have it turn to dust in his hands. He would see Chloe's face, her smile twisting into a cold, mocking sneer. He stopped leaving the apartment for anything other than groceries. The city outside his window felt like a party he was no longer invited to. His own reflection became that of a stranger, his eyes hollow, his face pale and unshaven. He was drowning in a sea of shame, and the worst part was that he blamed himself, not for the crime he didn't commit, but for the one he did, his own blindness. How could I have been so stupid? How could I not see what they were doing? The question became a whip with which he flogged himself, day after agonizing day. The final stage of his descent was triggered by a simple white envelope. The savings he had so carefully built were gone, drained away by rent and his mother's ever-present medical needs. The envelope was from her care facility, a final notice, its language cold and clinical. He was out of money, and he was out of time. That evening, he sat in the dark, the letter crumpled in his fist, and he hit the bottom. It was a place of absolute stillness and despair. He had nothing left. No job, no reputation, no friends, no future. It was in that profound darkness that a single, flickering memory came to him. His Uncle Arthur. A quiet, academic man who had been a peripheral figure in his life. His mother's older brother, a retired history professor, or so Liam had always thought. Arthur was eccentric, a bit of a recluse, but he was kind. He sent books for birthdays and always remembered Liam's mother on holidays. He was family. Liam wasn't looking for a handout. He didn't even know if his uncle could help. He was looking for an anchor, a voice of reason in the storm that was his mind. He was calling to confess. He picked up his phone, his hand shaking so badly he could barely dial the number. It rang 3 times, each one an eternity. A calm, steady voice answered. Arthur Sterling. Liam took a ragged breath, the words catching in his throat. Uncle Arthur? He said, his own voice sounding broken and foreign to him. It's Liam. There was a pause on the other end. I'm in trouble, he finally managed to whisper. I messed up. I messed everything up. It was an admission of a failure that wasn't his, but in that moment of surrender, that single, desperate cry for help into the void, the long, terrible descent of Liam Sterling finally came to an end. On the other end of the line, there was no gasp of shock, no rush of pity. There was only a thoughtful, profound silence. When Arthur Sterling finally spoke, his voice was not that of a concerned uncle, but of a grandmaster assessing a chessboard. Good, he said, the single word cutting through Liam's haze of despair with surgical precision. Now that you have hit the bottom, you are finally ready to listen. Liam was taken aback by the coldness, the strange lack of emotion. Meet me in 1 hour, Arthur continued, his tone leaving no room for argument. He gave Liam an address in the heart of the financial district, a sleek obsidian tower that clawed at the sky. It was a world away from the quiet, book-lined university offices Liam associated with his uncle. And Liam, Arthur added, just before he hung up, wear a suit. An hour later, Liam stood in a minimalist, impossibly expensive-looking waiting room on the 80th floor. He had spent the last of his emergency cash on a taxi and worn the only suit he owned, the one he'd bought for the Innovate Dynamics interview years ago. It felt both too big and too small, a costume from a life that no longer fit. He was led into a sprawling corner office. There were no dusty bookshelves or framed history maps. Instead, one entire wall was a seamless bank of monitors displaying fluctuating stock tickers, satellite news feeds, and complex financial data. The other 2 walls were pure glass, offering a god's eye view of New York City. Standing in the center of the room, silhouetted against the sky, was his uncle. Arthur was not the slightly stooped, tweed-wearing academic Liam remembered. He was dressed in a perfectly tailored dark gray suit, his posture straight, his presence radiating an aura of immense, understated power. The kindly, absent-minded professor was gone. In his place stood a titan. You didn't mess up, Liam, Arthur said, his voice calm and steady as he turned from the window. You were checkmated. There's a difference. One implies a flaw in your character, the other, a flaw in your understanding of the game. Liam started to stammer an apology, a rambling explanation, but Arthur raised a hand to stop him. I know what happened. I know who Marcus Thorne Island. I know who Chloe Vance Island. I know about the faked logs, the draft email, the ghost server. I have known from the beginning. Liam stared at him, his mind reeling in disbelief. How? How could you possibly know all that? Arthur gestured to one of the screens, which showed a complex web of corporate ownership structures. Buried deep within the chart was the name Innovate Dynamics, and connected to it, through a series of shell corporations and venture capital funds, was one name, Sterling Capital. I have not been entirely honest with you about my retirement, Liam, Arthur said, his eyes sharp and clear. I did not retire from teaching history. I merely stopped. My real work is making it. In the circles where I move, they have a name for me, AS. It stands for Arthur Sterling. The name hit Liam like a physical force. AS was a legend in the tech world, a mythical, unseen investor known for his Midas touch and his absolute anonymity. He was the ghost in the machine of Silicon Valley, the silent partner behind a dozen billion-dollar companies. And he was Liam's uncle. The world tilted on its axis. Why? Liam whispered, the only word he could manage. Why didn't you tell me? Why did you let this happen? Arthur walked over to the window, gazing down at the city below. Because you were a brilliant child, Liam. You saw the world as a series of elegant problems to be solved with elegant code. You did not see the messy, illogical, and often brutal variable of human nature. You saw a colleague in Chloe Vance. You failed to see a rival. You saw a mentor in Marcus Thorne. You failed to see a parasite. You built a fortress with the most ingenious defenses imaginable, but you left the front gate wide open and handed the key to the first person who smiled at you. He turned back to face his nephew, his expression hardening. Power given to a naive man is as dangerous as a sword in the hands of a child. I have watched your career since the day you graduated. I saw your genius, and I saw your fatal flaw. You trusted too easily. I could have intervened. I could have had Marcus Thorne fired for stealing office supplies a year ago. But what would you have learned? You would have continued on, brilliant and blind, waiting for the next snake to bite you. This humiliation, this pain, this descent, it was a crucible. It was necessary. It has burned the naivety out of you. The man who walked into this office today is not the same boy who was fired 2 months ago. Now, you have seen the world for what it truly island. Now, you are finally ready for real power. Arthur pointed a remote at the main screen. The web of companies vanished, replaced by the Innovate Dynamics stock ticker. It was a brutal, cascading line of red, showing a 30% drop in value since the day Liam was fired. Next to it, he brought up a series of internal project management reports, leaked to him by sources deep within the company. They showed Project Chimera in a state of chaos. Deadlines were being missed, key functions were failing, and the code had become a tangled mess of incompetent patches. As I suspected, Arthur said with a thin, cold smile. Thorne and Vance were able to steal your blueprint, but they have no idea how to build the cathedral. Without its architect, your masterpiece is collapsing into rubble. Their greed and incompetence are making the company bleed value. They are making it cheap. He turned off the screen and looked directly at Liam, his eyes blazing with a cold fire. So, this is the plan. We are not going to sue them for wrongful termination. We are not going to leak the truth to the press. That is the weak man's justice, a fleeting victory. We are going to do something far more thorough. He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. Their failure has created a strategic opportunity. My funds will begin a hostile takeover of Innovate Dynamics, effective immediately. We will use their panic and desperation against them. We will acquire a controlling interest, we will seize the board, and we will take their company. And when we do, he paused, letting the weight of his next words settle. You will be the one I install to run it. You are going to walk back into that office, not as an employee, but as their new boss. You will sit in Marcus Thorne's chair, and you will decide his fate and the fate of the girl who broke your heart. The despair in Liam's soul, which had been a vast, empty ocean, began to recede. In its place, something new and hard began to crystallize. It was not joy. It was not happiness. It was a cold, pure, and absolute sense of purpose. The architect was about to become the demolitions expert. The days of despair were over, replaced by a new, colder reality. Liam's world shrank to a single, soundproofed room on the 80th floor of Sterling Capital, a place they simply called the War Room. It was a space that ran on caffeine, intellect, and the quiet, relentless hum of immense financial power. Here, the messy emotions of betrayal and revenge were distilled into the clean, cold language of strategy, target valuation, share acquisition, leveraged buyouts, and psychological warfare. Liam was no longer a victim. He was an asset, a weapon. He was the ghost in the machine, the unseen force who knew his target's every weakness because he had designed its every strength. He was surrounded by Arthur's elite team, a small core of specialists who operated with the precision of a military unit. There was Jan Lee, a forensic accountant who could read a balance sheet like a confession. Anya Sharma, a corporate lawyer whose smile was as sharp and dangerous as the loopholes she found in billion-dollar contracts. And a half-dozen anonymous data analysts who moved through the dark web of corporate information like sharks through water. At first, Liam felt like a layman in a room full of surgeons. They spoke a language of puts, calls, and poison pills that was foreign to him. But he soon realized that while they were experts on the game, he was the only one who intimately knew the players and the board. His true value became apparent in their first strategy session. Anya projected Innovate Dynamics' latest quarterly report onto a massive screen. It was a document filled with optimistic corporate jargon, written by Marcus and Chloe, explaining away the delays and stock depreciation. Their official position, Anya said, pointing to a line item, is that the budget overruns for Chimera are due to unforeseen server architecture demands and hardware scaling issues. A low murmur of acceptance went through the room. It was a plausible lie, but Liam spoke up, his voice quiet but firm, cutting through the silence. That's a lie. All eyes turned to him. He walked to the screen, a flicker of his old fire returning. I designed that architecture. It was built to handle 50 times the current user load on the existing hardware. I made it efficient on purpose. There are no unforeseen demands. He looked at Jan, the accountant. Check their expense reports for the past 2 months. Look for any new hardware contracts, specifically with a vendor called OmniCloud Solutions or Digital Fortress Incorporated. They're shell companies Marcus tried to get me to use a year ago, owned by his brother-in-law. Jian's fingers flew across her keyboard. A few moments later, her eyes widened. My God, she whispered. He's funneled over $3 million through OmniCloud for emergency server rentals that don't exist. The atmosphere in the room shifted. Liam wasn't just a source of information. He was a key, unlocking doors they didn't even know were there. He was exposing the rot beneath the floorboards. This became the new pattern. Arthur's team would identify a financial anomaly, and Liam would provide the human context. They saw inflated R&D expenses. He knew it was because Chloe had outsourced a coding module to an incompetent third-party team in a panic, then buried the cost. They saw a sudden drop in system performance. Liam was able to analyze the snippets of new code from the latest patch and demonstrate, technically, how Chloe's fixes had created a cascade of crippling memory leaks. He was performing a digital autopsy on the project he loved, and with every cut, he grew more detached, more clinical. He was no longer looking at his life's work. He was looking at evidence. He was the ghost haunting their every move, an invisible witness to their incompetence and their crimes. While Liam dissected the company's internal failures, Arthur's team waged war on the outside. It was a campaign of ruthless efficiency. They began by anonymously acquiring a significant, but not yet alarming, percentage of Innovate Dynamics stock through various holding companies. Then, they started to apply pressure. Anya's legal team initiated a subtle shareholder inquiry into the Chimera project's delays, raising just enough doubt to make other large investors nervous. At the same time, calculated, negative, but entirely true rumors about the project's internal chaos were strategically leaked to influential tech journalists and financial bloggers. The effect was exactly as Arthur predicted. Confidence in Marcus Thorne's leadership began to erode. The stock price, already weak, began to plummet. Marcus and the board, blinded by arrogance and desperate to stop the bleeding, saw the falling price not as a threat, but as an opportunity for a stock buyback, a move to consolidate their own power. They were completely unaware that they were using their own money to make it easier for their enemy to devour them. Liam watched all of this with a kind of awed horror. He was learning how the world truly worked, not through elegant code, but through brute force power and calculated perception. The man who had been shattered by a single public humiliation was now an integral part of a silent, corporate siege that was bringing a $100 million company to its knees. The process changed him. The wounded, emotional man who had called his uncle in despair was being systematically replaced by someone colder, harder, and infinitely more dangerous. He would spend hours analyzing Chloe's internal reports, her emails, her project plans. He felt no sadness, no lingering sense of betrayal, only a cold, analytical focus. He saw the patterns of her lies, the escalating scale of her credit stealing, the desperate way she tried to mimic his language, to fool the executives. He wasn't looking at the friend who had shared noodles with him. He was studying the operational tactics of his enemy. One evening, Arthur found him alone in the war room, staring at a screen that showed a live feed of the Innovate Dynamics office building. "You see it now, don't you, Liam?" Arthur said quietly, standing beside him. "Your pain, we have refined it. We have weaponized it. They thought they were burying a man, but they were planting a seed. All your knowledge of that company, your intimate understanding of their flaws and their fears, that is our greatest weapon." The takeover was nearly complete. Through a final, aggressive push on the open market, Sterling Capital had secured a controlling 51% stake in Innovate Dynamics. They now owned the board, the company, and everything in it. The ammunition Liam had helped gather a comprehensive dossier detailing not just the frame-up, but gross mismanagement, intellectual property neglect, and the beginnings of a massive embezzlement scheme was ready. The ghost in the machine had finished his work. It was time for him to become flesh and blood once more. It was time to return. The final move in Arthur Sterling's war was not a thunderous cannonade, but a quiet, digital whisper. At precisely 2 p.m. on a Friday, an email bloomed in the inbox of every employee at Innovate Dynamics. The sender was an unfamiliar name, David Harrison, Senior Partner, Sterling Capital. The subject line was stark and absolute. An important announcement regarding the future of Innovate Dynamics. A wave of silence rolled across the open plan office as, one by one, people stopped typing and clicked it open. The email was brief. It announced that the acquisition by Sterling Capital was complete. It summoned every employee to a mandatory company-wide town hall meeting in 1 hour to formally introduce the new leadership and discuss the strategic vision for the future. The silence that followed was heavy with the unspoken anxieties of 1,000 corporate takeovers. The air thickened with whispers of layoffs, restructuring, and forced retirements. For most employees, the future had just become a terrifying, uncertain fog. But in the corner office, the one with the panoramic view of the city, the atmosphere was not one of fear. It was one of triumphant expectation. Marcus Thorne and Chloe Vance stood by the window, looking down on the nervous flock they no longer considered their peers. They saw themselves not as employees, but as victors about to be crowned. "Look at them," Marcus said, a dismissive sneer in his voice, scurrying around like frightened mice. "They have no idea this is the best thing that could have happened to this company." Chloe, nursing a cup of tea, nodded in agreement. "They need us, Marcus," she said, her voice filled with a serene, unshakable confidence. "We're the only ones who truly understand Chimera. We're the ones who held it all together, after the incident. The new owners will see that. They're investors, they'll protect their investment." They had spent the past weeks constructing a heroic narrative for themselves, polishing it until it shone. They were the loyal commanders who had identified and purged a traitor from the ranks, saving the company's crown jewel from being sold to the highest bidder. In their minds, they were not just essential, they were heroes. Marcus was certain a promotion to the board of directors was imminent. Chloe, in turn, saw herself sliding gracefully into his newly vacated office, finally claiming the title of Director of Product Development. They were the future. When the time came, they walked into the main conference room, the very same room that had served as the stage for Liam's public execution, with an air of regal procession. They didn't huddle with their old teams. They took their seats in the front row, which had been implicitly reserved for senior leadership. Their posture was a broadcast of their confidence. Marcus sat with his legs crossed, the picture of a man at ease with power. Chloe sat beside him, poised and smiling, occasionally offering a nod of feigned reassurance to a nervous-looking junior developer. They were performing their final act as the saviors of Innovate Dynamics, soaking in the nervous energy of the room, believing it was all a prelude to their coronation. The lights dimmed. A man they had never seen before walked onto the stage. He was tall, dressed in a severe, dark suit, with silver hair and the cold, placid eyes of a man who moved billions of dollars before breakfast. This was David Harrison. He approached the podium and surveyed the silent, anxious crowd. "Good afternoon," he began, his voice calm and devoid of emotion. "My name is David Harrison, and on behalf of Sterling Capital, I want to welcome you to a new era for Innovate Dynamics." He launched into a speech filled with the familiar, soothing platitudes of corporate transitions. He spoke of synergy, of unlocking shareholder value, and of a renewed commitment to innovation. It was a speech designed to be both reassuring and utterly meaningless. Marcus and Chloe exchanged a small, knowing smile. This was standard procedure. Then, Harrison's tone began to shift. The placid surface of his speech began to ripple. "We have acquired this company because we believe in its potential," he said, his eyes scanning the front row. "But we are also aware of the challenges it has faced. Challenges of execution. We have noted significant project delays, substantial budget overruns, and a troubling erosion of market confidence." A subtle chill permeated the room. Marcus's smile tightened just a fraction. He assumed Harrison was criticizing the previous ousted board members, a necessary political move to establish the new regime's authority. He still believed he was exempt, a protected species. Harrison then pivoted, his focus zeroing in on the company's heart. "The future of this company," he declared, his voice gaining a new intensity, "rests on the success of one project. Chimera." He paused, letting the name hang in the air. "It is a revolutionary concept, a true crown jewel. But a project of this magnitude, this importance, demands more than just competent management. It requires a leader of extraordinary vision, of unimpeachable integrity. It requires someone with a profound, almost cellular, knowledge of its core architecture, the kind of knowledge that can only belong to its true creator." As Harrison spoke those last words, his gaze and the gaze of nearly everyone in the room fell upon Marcus Thorne. This was it, the moment of ascension. Chloe's face was aglow with pride, her eyes fixed on Marcus. Marcus himself felt a surge of adrenaline. He subtly straightened his tie, a small, smug smile playing on his lips, preparing to stand and accept the accolades he so deeply felt he deserved. Harrison let the silence stretch, a masterful piece of theatrical timing. He held the entire room in the palm of his hand. The old leadership, for reasons we are still investigating, made a catastrophic error in judgment. It is our first order of business to correct that error. He looked out over the crowd, his cold eyes seeming to pierce through every person there. That is why, to correct the course of this project, and to lead our entire product division into a future of accountability and true innovation, we have sought out and reinstated the one person who fits that description perfectly. The tension was a physical thing, a high-frequency hum in the air. Marcus's smile was frozen on his face. Chloe held her breath. "So, it is my distinct honor," Harrison said, his voice ringing with a sudden, sharp clarity, "to introduce to you all your new Executive Vice President of Product Development." Harrison's voice hung in the air, a suspended cord of tension waiting to resolve. The entire company held its breath. Marcus Thorne, frozen in the posture of a man about to rise, had a smile of pure triumph plastered on his face. Chloe Vance watched him with adoring, victorious eyes. They were at the very peak of their mountain, gazing down at the world they believed they had conquered. The pause stretched for 1 second, then two, becoming almost unbearable. Harrison's face remained a blank, unreadable slate. And then, with the cold, simple finality of a judge passing sentence, he spoke the name. Mr. Liam Sterling. For a moment, the name didn't register. It was a phantom sound, a glitch in the audio system, a collective hallucination. The name was an impossibility. Liam Sterling was a ghost, a disgraced traitor, a story they told to new hires about the importance of loyalty. But then, from the deep shadows at the side of the stage, a figure emerged. He moved into the stark white light of the podium, and a single, unified gasp sucked the air from the room. It was him. But it was not the Liam Sterling they remembered. The slightly stooped, unassuming coder with the tired eyes and the perpetually apologetic posture was gone. In his place stood a man forged in a different fire. He was dressed in a dark, impeccably tailored suit that spoke of quiet, immense wealth. His shoulders were straight, his jaw was set, and his gaze was not nervous or angry, but a flat, glacial calm. He moved with a slow, deliberate confidence, the walk of a man who owned not just the stage he was on, but the very ground beneath it. If the sight of him was a shock to the room, it was an apocalypse to Marcus and Chloe. Time seemed to warp and slow down, every detail magnified in excruciating clarity. The smug, self-satisfied smile on Marcus Thorne's face did not simply fall, it shattered. The color drained from his face, leaving behind a sallow, pasty gray. His jaw went slack, his eyes widened in sheer, uncomprehending horror. It was the look of a man who has just seen his own ghost walk through a wall, a man whose entire fabricated reality has been ripped to shreds in a single, brutal instant. He physically flinched in his chair, a small, involuntary jerk, as if he had been struck by lightning. Chloe's reaction was a symphony of panic. Her beaming pride dissolved into a mask of raw terror. Her mind, usually so quick and calculating, was visibly short-circuiting, trying to process an outcome that did not exist in her universe. Her eyes, wide and frantic, darted from the impossible figure of Liam on the stage to the collapsing face of Marcus, and back again. She looked like a trapped animal, a conspirator whose airtight plot had just detonated in her face. The hero of her story had just been revealed as the villain, and the villain she had created was now standing before her as judge, jury, and executioner. Across the room, the initial shockwave of disbelief gave way to a tsunami of frantic whispers. Is that really him? What is going on? He looks different. People were no longer looking at the stage, but at the front row. They were looking at the ashen, horrified faces of Marcus and Chloe, and in their reactions, the truth began to dawn. This was not a mistake. This was a coup. Liam reached the podium and placed his hands on either side of it. He did not immediately speak. He simply stood there, a figure of absolute stillness, and surveyed the room. He did not look at Marcus. He did not look at Chloe. His cool, dispassionate gaze swept over the entire audience, and under its weight, the whispers died, the fidgeting stopped, and a profound, electric silence fell. He owned the room. "Thank you, David," he said, his voice calm and even, amplified by the microphone. It was a voice stripped of all its former hesitancy, a voice honed to a sharp metallic edge. "I know my presence here today is unexpected." A bitter, ironic laugh rippled through a few employees in the back. Liam's expression did not change. "The last several months at this company have been a period of significant drift," he continued, each word chosen with deliberate, surgical precision. "We have chased short-term illusions instead of building long-term value. We have tolerated mediocrity. We have rewarded politics over performance." He was not shouting. He was not accusing. He was simply stating facts, but every sentence landed like a hammer blow on Marcus and Chloe, who could do nothing but sit there and absorb the punishment. "That ends today," Liam stated. "My mandate from the new ownership is simple and absolute. We will restore integrity to our process. We will restore genius to our products. And we will restore accountability to our leadership." He paused, letting the final word hang in the air like a threat. Project Chimera will move forward, but it will be rebuilt on a foundation of truth, not of lies. There will be changes. The work ahead will be difficult, but I can promise you this: The era of excuses is over. He looked out at the sea of stunned faces, his eyes finally sweeping over the front row without pausing, without acknowledgement, as if Marcus and Chloe were nothing more than empty chairs. "I look forward to working with those of you who share a genuine passion for innovation," he said. "Now, let's get back to work." With a slight, dismissive nod, he stepped back from the podium. It was over. The speech had lasted less than 2 minutes, but it had fundamentally rewritten the reality of every person in the room. Harrison stepped forward. "Thank you, Mr. Sterling. This meeting is adjourned." The spell was broken. A chaotic buzz filled the room as people, dazed, began to stand and file out. They moved with a strange urgency, avoiding eye contact with the two figures still frozen in the front row. The power shift was instantaneous and absolute. Marcus and Chloe were no longer leaders to be feared or respected. They were relics, radioactive artifacts of a fallen regime. Within minutes, the vast conference room was empty, save for the three of them. Marcus and Chloe sat silently, two statues of ruin in the front row. And on the stage, bathed in the spotlight, stood Liam Sterling. He was not looking at them. He was looking out at the empty room, at his new domain, his figure casting a long, dark shadow that stretched all the way to the back wall. The reckoning had not just begun, it had arrived. Liam did not go back to his old desk. He went straight to the corner office, the one with the panoramic view of the city, the one that had belonged to Marcus Thorne just an hour ago. The personal effects, the framed photos, the tacky motivational posters, the silver pudding green were already being packed into a box by an assistant. Liam waited silently by the door until she was finished. When the room was empty, sterile, and anonymous, he walked in. He did not sit behind the vast mahogany desk. Instead, he walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows and looked down at the city, a kingdom of glass and steel that had once chewed him up and spat him out. From his new terminal, he sent a single, calendarless meeting invitation to 2 people. Subject: final review. Location: my office. Time: now. Marcus and Chloe received the summons on their phones simultaneously. They looked at each other, their faces pale masks of dread. They walked from the conference room to the office in a silence that was heavier than any shout. The walk was a gauntlet of 1,000 averted eyes. The colleagues who had once sought their favor now stared intently at their screens, suddenly fascinated by spreadsheets and emails. The power they had wielded was gone, and in its place was a contagious disease of which everyone was afraid to be the next victim. They entered the office and stood there, 2 criminals before a judge. Liam didn't turn around for a long moment, forcing them to wait, to stew in the terrifying silence. When he finally did, his face was calm, his eyes were cold, and his voice was a flat, clinical monotone. "Please," he said, gesturing to the 2 chairs in front of the desk. "Sit." Saturday Marcus, trying to muster the last dregs of his blustering arrogance, opened his mouth to speak. "Liam, look, I don't know what kind of game you and your new backers are playing." Liam raised a single finger, and Marcus's voice died in his throat. "There is no game," Liam said simply. "There is only a review of the facts." He touched a control on the desk. A large, high-resolution monitor on the wall behind him hummed to life. On it was a simple slide, titled Exhibit A, The Breach. "This," Liam began, his voice narrating as if he were presenting a technical paper, "is the server log from the evening of May 12th. The evening you, Marcus, claimed my reckless code caused a data leak." He highlighted a line of text. "This entry shows the creation of the hidden directory, sys, log, archive, Q3. And this is the IP address and terminal ID from which the command was executed." The camera zoomed in on the ID. It was Chloe's workstation. Chloe let out a small, choked gasp, her hand flying to her mouth. Liam advanced to the next slide. Exhibit B, the motive. It was a complex flowchart of financial transactions. "This," he continued in the same unnervingly calm tone, "is a record of all budgetary expenditures for Project Chimera over the last fiscal year. And this," he highlighted a series of wire transfers, "is the money trail from your approved hardware vendor, OmniCloud Solutions, to an untraceable offshore account." He brought up the account details. The name on the account was not Marcus's, but it belonged to a man whose face Liam now showed on screen, a photo of Marcus and his smiling brother-in-law at a family barbecue. Marcus's face, already pale, was now the color of ash. Liam finally turned his full attention to them, his cold gaze pinning them to their chairs. "I have to admit," he said, a flicker of something that wasn't quite a smile touching his lips. "For months, I was obsessed with the wrong question. I kept asking myself, why would they betray me just for a promotion? Why would Chloe do this to me? It seemed disproportionate, but I was looking at it all wrong." He leaned forward, his hands resting on the cool surface of the desk. This was the moment of the twist, the final, devastating turn of the knife. You see, framing me was never the primary objective. It was a secondary one. It was a diversion. You, Marcus, were embezzling millions of dollars from the project budget, but an internal audit was scheduled, and you knew your fake vendor contracts wouldn't survive the scrutiny. You needed a crisis. A massive, terrifying scandal that would send everyone into a panic, that would draw all attention away from the boring financial records. You needed a fire, and you needed someone to throw into it. He looked at Chloe, his eyes now devoid of any warmth, any memory of their shared friendship. "And that's where you came in, Chloe. Your ambition was the tool he used. He promised you his job, and in return, you helped him create the scandal. You planted the evidence. You performed for the board. You weren't just betraying a friend for a promotion. You were a willing accessory to grand larceny." The truth, stark and complete, hung in the air between them, a poison that paralyzed them both. Marcus was broken, his arrogance shattered into a million pieces, revealing the pathetic, terrified man underneath. Chloe finally broke, silent tears streaming down her face, a soundless confession of her guilt. Liam watched them for a moment, then leaned back. "So, no," he said quietly. "You are not fired." A flicker of insane hope crossed their faces. "Your employment was terminated by this company the moment you conspired to commit corporate fraud," Liam clarified, his voice like ice. "I am simply here to oversee the administrative details of your departure." He pressed a button on the intercom on his desk. "Security, we're ready in the corner office." He stood up, the meeting clearly over. A complete, unredacted copy of this presentation, along with several hundred pages of supporting evidence, was delivered to the district attorney's office an hour ago, he informed them, his voice casual. "My uncle's legal team is far more thorough than the one you are about to hire." 2 uniformed security guards entered the room. They did not touch Marcus or Chloe, but stood by the door, their presence a silent, immovable verdict. Marcus and Chloe rose, their movements stiff, like automatons. They were escorted out, past the watching eyes of the entire office, their walk of shame, a final, damning spectacle. Liam stood alone in his new office, the silence ringing in his ears. He walked back to the window and watched as the lights of New York began to bloom in the encroaching twilight. He felt no joy, no triumphant surge of adrenaline. The fire of his revenge had burned out, leaving behind not warmth, but a quiet, hollow peace. He had not won. He had simply survived. The scales had been balanced. The storyteller's voice fills the silence. Don't ever underestimate the silence of a person who has endured for too long, because when they finally decide to speak, their voice is not a word, it is a verdict. Justice in the corporate world can take many forms. Sometimes it is loud and swift, and sometimes it is quiet, cold, and calculated. Liam Sterling's story is over, but the whispers of betrayal and the promise of a reckoning echo in every office building in the world. Join us next time as we explore another tale from the front lines of the modern workplace.